Well, on the back of the listing requirements by the King 4 report released in November 2016, it requires listed companies to promote racial diversity at board level. The JSE now has amended its listing requirements to reflect this change. This is the Moneymakers. I'm Bruce Whitfield, and tonight we discuss the new listing amendments with Zeona Jacobs, who is Marketing Director and Corporate Affairs Director at the JSE. King 4 is what, nearly 2 years old? Why have you guys taken so long to respond?
No, it's a year. November.
Okay, yeah, 2 years. But still, I mean, a year is a long time to respond in terms of the requirements following the King 4 recommendations.
The reason why we've taken this long, which is like all of 6 months,
feels like much longer.
It is because the consultation process that we have to follow. So out of the 17 principles, there's one principle of King 4 that deals with the governing bodies having to consider racial, gender, and experience considerations. And based on that, we amended our listings requirements for our listed companies to be able to publish their compliance report with the broad-based Black economic empowerment.
So this isn't stipulating numbers, it's a requirement to publish progress.
Correct. They have to publish this on SENS as well as on their website. That's the one thing they have to do. Then the second thing they have to do is their policy at board level for racial and gender diversity have to be published as well on their website. So really it's just giving visibility to what their companies are already doing, but this just enables investors, interested stakeholders to be able to see exactly what progress has been made against the targets that have been set by the companies themselves.
Now, King is famous worldwide for its brilliance in that it is principles based. Correct. So King publishes principles. He says these aren't rules, these are guidelines. You do with these as you wish. By taking the principles and putting them into requirements, they become a rule.
Correct. So
you've taken a principle and turned it into a rule. Doesn't that undermine King?
No, it doesn't necessarily undermine King. We don't take everything that a King does and say you have to comply with it. There are things that we take into consideration given the environment in which we operate, which is South Africa primarily, and the transformation agenda of the country, and see how we can support it. What we also say in general about the 17 new King principles is apply and explain, not just, comply and explain, yes, not just apply as we had in the past. In the past we said you can apply the rules, but if you haven't applied all of us, just explain to us why you are not doing it. Now we're saying you have to comply with it and explain it to us.
It's going to put a considerable amount of more pressure on boardrooms to transform. I mean, that's the intention.
I think, you know, for us, what we don't, as the JSE, we are not going to, as you said right in the beginning of this interview, put the targets on there. But what is important, given where our country is today, is that companies just needs to make that visible. A lot of work is being done in a number of the corporations listed on the JSE, and what this just does is give shareholders, interested parties, the opportunity to see how they are progressing against it.
So a company might publish its principles, it might publish its targets. It may say our board is currently made up of 11 people, 10 are white men, 1 is a white woman, and we aim to change this demographic to have greater representation over the next 5 years. That's sufficiently vague for it to do absolutely nothing for 5 years.
No. So they have to put that on. That's their policy. This is the direction that they're of travel. Now you have to state how are you doing against it. So the JSE will then track this is the policy. We also, as you will remember, instituted a gender policy last year, which companies are now beginning to respond to this year. They have to publish their results on gender. But they put the policy in place and they'll say we want 5 out of the 10 or 12 board members to be women, and we will then every year demonstrate how we are tracking against the policy that we've put in place.
What if they fail to meet their own policy goals?
So what we try to do as the JSE, we try to remedy what they're doing. So we will communicate with the listed company to say, firstly, we see you haven't actually published on SENS your compliance certificate. Secondly, if you have published it, we can see that against the policy that you've stated, you've actually made no progress. when can we expect progress? So there will be ongoing communication to try and remedy what the companies have been doing. So it's just putting a little bit of pressure on them to say you have to demonstrate change.
And if they fail to do so, does it become a reason to suspend a listing?
We don't believe it we'll get to a point where we suspend a listing because people have not complied. However, we are not going to stop with the first engagement. It will be an ongoing engagement. So that pressure...
It's more moral suasion than a big stick. If you fail to comply with transformation within your boardroom, we're going to suspend your listing. In the same way as you can do it if you lose your sponsor and your auditor, or either one or the both, as we've seen recently with Oakbay.
In this instance, we are not saying we will suspend you. But as you said, is moral suasion. What is the right thing to do at this time in our country to enable transformation?
The boardroom is going to come under pressure to do that. Now, is that across all categories of listing, from Alt-X all the way through to the top 20 companies on the JSE?
No one is exempt from these listings requirements. All companies are required to comply with this listings requirement.
Does it put off the small family-run business or the substantial family-run business that thinks we're going to raise some capital on the Alt-X? It's already so onerous to raise money on Alt-X. Suddenly there's another piece of regulation that requires a box to be ticked.
Look, I think that, while we don't want to bring more onerous requirements to anybody, and we don't think that our listings requirements are onerous, we think that the requirement to transform is a national imperative. And I think any company, any good corporate citizen would want to ensure that they adhere to
If that's the case, why implement a regulation around it? A requirement. I mean, if everybody's on the same page, it's a bit like Private Gordon used to try and convince everybody that everyone loved paying tax. It seems contradictory. I mean, it wouldn't be necessary unless it was necessary. You clearly feel it's necessary because companies aren't doing enough or aren't seen to be
doing enough. And I think because there is the BEE Commission that looks at how companies are doing, but that level of transparency isn't there. I don't think we understand how much actually has been done either against a specific charter or specific codes. And what this will enable the stakeholders to see is actually what has been done. And also, if the stakeholders are feeling very strongly about a particular issue, they now have the opportunity to raise it at an AGM or at a presentation, an annual list.
How will this deal with the perception of white dominance? Maybe it's a reality of boardrooms of companies listed on the JSE.
How will it deal with the dominance?
Or perceptions of dominance?
Perception. I think there's a lot of change has taken place on a number of boards, but it's not transparent. So you don't see it. Not everybody actually goes to the website of a listed company and look at who all those board members are. Recently in Parliament at the hearings for the financial services sector on transformation, it was quite interesting to note how boards have transformed. And the focus of the work that we are doing is at two levels. The one is the general broad code, but also particularly looking at the board level, because that is where we believe policy strategy is set for these organizations. And you can see that there has been some transformation, but not nearly enough.
How is this going to affect companies with offshore listings? For example, the British American Tobaccos of the world, the Anheuser-Busches of the world, who are going to have a look at this requirement saying, well, if you don't want us, we'll go. You can't force an Anheuser-Busch to comply with the transformation requirements of the JSE.
It's quite interesting. We had a meeting with the BEE Commission where we actually questioned whether a dual-listed company, somebody like an A&B InBev, whether they should be complying. And actually, based on the law, if you're listed on the JSE, you have to comply. So any of our dual-listed stock or stock that is just this could be their primary listing, but their operations are elsewhere have to comply with the requirements.
Okay, so but Anheuser-Busch InBev says we've got two Brazilians, we've got a couple of Americans, we've got a couple of Europeans on our board. We're not going to transform our global board to reflect the demographics of South Africa.
Well, what you've seen with some companies, and Mondi is a case in point, where most of Mondi's operations are now abroad. Actually, it's not local. You've seen where they have actually complied in terms of who their board members are. So there are a number of our listed companies who have said wherever we have operations, we'd like representation. So I don't think it is, they might not comply, they might not have a 50-50% white, black or male-female ratio, but what does happen on those big and larger dual-listed stocks is that companies actually do appoint black executives.
But they may very well, but what happens if they don't comply with if they just simply refuse to publish a transformation part of their annual report? British American Tobacco says we're jolly happy here in Pall Mall in London, and we don't give a damn what you think. Down there, you're just lucky to have our listing.
So I think in terms of the engagement with our issuer regulation department, we will get to an agreement of, and this is why we actually went to go and see the BEE Commission to try and understand what exactly they require.
But is it workable?
I think it is, because it's not, that's what, in terms of the overall broad-based black economic empowerment requirements, there are other areas, if they have operations in the country, where they will be able to demonstrate what they are doing. So that is important. It's not just at the board level.
Again, one wants to avoid the ticking of the box, because there's a risk that we go for the ticking of the box, and that's got us into all kinds of trouble up until now in terms of requirements and regulations and everything else.
And this is why there are two levels to this. There's the board level, and then it's your overall scorecard. And your overall scorecard, if you're operational in South Africa, requires you to do skills transfer, all of this. And this is why it's not one, it's both.
Right. And to leave it there, Zeona Jacobs, who is Director of Marketing and Corporate Affairs at the JSE. Some interesting roads to transformation for South Africa. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the boardroom, although there's a huge amount of focus, of course, on boardroom transformation. You can maybe read the Riot Act in South Africa to South Africa domiciled boards, and it's considerably more complicated when they're situated elsewhere in a globalized environment. Until next time, thanks for watching The Moneymakers. Good night.